Good evening and a very warm welcome to each one of you. Wish you all a very happy Respiratory Care Week. This is Akash and I represent here as the General Secretary of the Maharashtra chapter of Indian Association of Respiratory Care. I'm also currently working as a respiratory therapist in SL Raheja Hospital, Mumbai. As we all know that this pandemic has hit us pre 10 months back, and all the healthcare professionals are fighting against this pandemic. And we know that even respiratory therapists have been recognized as the frontline warriors in this pandemic. So I really appreciate the time and the hard work dedication of all our RTs who are working as the frontline warriors in fighting against this pandemic. So without wasting much of time, I would now like to go with the further proceedings. Uh, Before that, I would like to introduce to our speakers of today. We have here with us Mr. Abu Talha Hanfi, who's currently working as a respiratory therapist in Symbiosis University Hospital and Research Center. We have here with us Mr. Ashish Yadav, who's working as a respiratory therapist in SL Raheja Hospital, Mumbai. Also, we have here with us Ms. Neha Shinde, who's a respiratory therapist and a clinical application specialist working with Aerogen India Private Limited. So may I now request Ms. Neha Shinde to take over the session. Ms. Neha, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Akash, for that kind introduction. Okay, so I will start with the presentation. Just a second. Okay. So we, the respiratory therapists, are the experts when it comes to aerosol therapy. So with the rapidly changing field of aerosol medicine and the delivery devices, it is imperative for us that we share our expertise with our healthcare members in the continuum of care. So to begin with the presentation, the aerosol therapy is considered as the cornerstone of in treating the respiratory infection. So the aim of this presentation is to enhance the knowledge of the healthcare professionals and to provide the opportunity to advance the knowledge of the healthcare professionals and the expertise as far as the aerosol drug delivery system in COVID-19 patients is considered. So purposefully, I have put this slide as my first slide because in treating any kind of patient, first step is infection control. So in infection control, the basic and the most important step is hand hygiene. So these are the 5 important steps. First one is before touching the patient, you have to always perform hand hygiene. Second is before any aseptic procedure. After exposure to body fluids. Fourth is after touching a patient. And 5 is after touching patient's surrounding. So these are the very important 5 points before and after which you have to perform hand hygiene. And as far as COVID is concerned, we all know the importance of our hand hygiene or washing the hands frequently. So it is very, very important that we perform thoroughly the infection control protocols, and the most important one is the hand hygiene. So to begin with the presentation, first we will see some basics of aerosol therapy. So what is aerosol therapy? So medical aerosols are defined as any solid or liquid suspension where the gas works as a carrier. So aerosol therapy is defined as any solid or liquid suspension into air or gas. What is aerosol? This is known as aerosol. Now, what is aerosol therapy? Aerosol therapy is a medical treatment that is used in treatment of various conditions, especially for respiratory infections. Why do we need aerosol therapy? What are the benefits of aerosol therapy? First and foremost benefit of aerosol therapy that it is safest. Then is the rapid onset of action. As we are giving it directly to the targeted organ, the onset of action is very rapid. We are giving directly it to the targeted organ. That's why the side effects which are very, very minimal as compared to the systemic insertion, as it is non-invasive, and we all know that the surface area of lung is very extensive. That's why the absorption of drug is very rapid. That's why the drug dose which will be absorbed by the lung is higher. That's why the effect of drug which will be given through aerosol therapy will be more effective as compared to systemic administration. So safest, fastest, and effective. These are the main three reasons why we should consider aerosol therapy when it comes to any respiratory disease. Now, as far as COVID patients are considered, we have to very cautiously use aerosol therapy. That's why there are very limited indications for COVID patients where we administer aerosol therapy to this patient. So if the patient is having any comorbidity like asthma or COPD, then we can give bronchodilator therapy to the patient. Again, which will be very cautiously. We have to think about the delivery devices and the hazards it may cause. So very cautiously, we have to give aerosol therapy in COVID patients. Second is if the patient develops any airway resistance or bronchospasm while the patient is intubated or on mechanical ventilation, or we have to administer antibiotic to the patient. So these are the minimum indications where we have to consider aerosol therapy for the COVID patients. Now we will see the devices through which there are extensive devices for delivering aerosol therapy present in the market. But as far as COVID patients are considered, we have to be very cautious when we deliver aerosol therapy and choose our delivery devices. So the preference is given to PMDIs, that is pressurized metered-dose inhalers, and vibrating mesh nebulizers. And the least considered devices are small volume nebulizers. Why? Because the chances of spreading the infection or the virus is the highest when we use small volume nebulizers. So we have to avoid using SVNs in COVID patients. Now, the commonly used drugs to these nebulizers: bronchodilators, steroids, antibiotics, vasodilators, and mucolytics. The examples of each kind of drug is given. Now we will see the guidelines for aerosol therapy. First and foremost, I told that aerosol therapy for COVID patients should be given very cautiously. It should be administered only if it is necessary. First we have to see what is the indication to deliver aerosol therapy. Then second is, if at all we want to deliver aerosol therapy to the patient, the preferred choice will be a closed system nebulizer that does not break the circuit is desirable. So what does this means? That a closed circuit nebulizer which does not break the circuit means. So the nebulizer which we through which we will be giving the medicine to the patient should not be detached from the ventilator. So it should be in line with the ventilator till the patient is on the ventilator. So we have to just open the cap, refill the medicine. We don't need to open the chamber and disconnect the chamber from the mechanical ventilator. Otherwise, it will create a leak from the ventilator, and there are high chances that the aerosols can be spread in the environment. So that's why aerosol therapy is considered as the most highly risk aerosol generating procedure. That's why a closed circuit nebulizer, especially MDI or vibrating mesh nebulizer, is recommended. So this is MDI, which can be inserted into the mechanical ventilator, or a vibrating mesh nebulizer, which can be easily integrated in the ventilator circuit from the beginning till the end of the patient, till the end of the patient mechanical ventilation days. So whether the patient is on mechanical on nebulization therapy or not, additional filter is recommended for the expiratory port of the ventilator circuit. And a single room or a negative pressure room is preferred for spontaneously breathing patients, especially as far as nebulization therapy is concerned. Why? Because this will contain the aerosols in the room only, and it will not spread to other patients. So always while giving nebulization, personal protective equipments are the must. So nebulization therapy, in nebulization therapy, contact or droplet related precautions, that is N95 mask, cap, goggles, and gowns are preferred. Then if no single room is available, at least 1.5 meter distance between the two patients must be there, and compulsorily with curtains drawn. So if a single room or negative pressure room is not available, there should be at least 1.5 meter distance between two patients, and the curtain should be drawn. Then if there is a single room, close the patient door and preferably wait outside the patient's room. If not possible, at least maintain a 6 feet or greater distance between the patient and you. So these are the common guidelines while giving nebulization therapy for COVID patients. The two main points are, if you are nebulizing a mechanically ventilated patient, try to use a closed circuit nebulizer where you do not need to break the circuit again and again to renebulize the patient, which increases the chances of spreading the infection to other patients also, and as well as for other healthcare professionals also. So this is the very main point. And the second is, if it is a spontaneously breathing patient, try use negative pressure room or single room. If both is not available, try to maintain safe distance. So these are the main points to be considered while giving aerosol therapy to the COVID patients. Now, one by one, we will see how this nebulizers or inhalers are incorporated in the mechanical ventilator to reduce the chances of infection. So when a meter dose is considered, we have to use just the canister and not this plastic part. So we have to remove this canister from the holder, attach it to a spacer over here. This is a spacer. Attach the canister to the spacer. Then with the spacer, the MDI will sit into the ventilator chamber before the Y-piece into the inspiratory limb, like this. So the MDI will sit between the Y-piece and the inspiratory limb of the patient's ventilator circuit. So before starting the aerosol therapy, first review order, assess the patient thoroughly before giving the bronchodilator therapy. perform endotracheal suction and clear the airway secretions, elevate patient's bed to 45 degrees so that the drug absorption and drug delivery to the lung is maximum. Then before using, shake the MDI properly. Always remember to remove HME filter before nebulization therapy, because all the aerosols will be collected in the HME filter if you do not remove it, or else you can put it after the HME filter. After removing the HME filter, place the nebulizer, place the MDI with the spacer in the circuit and ensure there is no leak. Then actuate the MDI in the according to the patient's inspiration. It should be coordinated between patient's inspiratory effort, and then it should be actuated. Then monitor for adverse response, and after delivering the first dose, there should be at least 15-second gap between the second actuation. And after the aerosol therapy, reconnect the HME filter to the ventilator. So this is the common way from which we can give aerosol therapy to the mechanically ventilated patient through MDIs. Some hospitals may have different types of circuits where just the canister we can directly put it to the insert it in the patient's ventilator circuit, where we do not need the spacer. So there are different kinds of ventilator circuits where just we can insert the canister into the patient's ventilator circuit. So it reduces the dead space. Second, we will see for vibrating mesh technology, how it should be used in mechanically ventilated patient. So this is the nebulizer, and this is the T-piece. The nebulizer sits upside on the T-piece. The jet nebulizer sits below over here in inverted. Vice versa, the jet nebulizer sits above the circuit. Then we have to attach a controller to the nebulizer over here. The controller powers the nebulizer. Vibrating mesh nebulizers does not need any external oxygen or air supply. They are powered by the controllers. Then this nebulizer will go into the ventilator circuit wherever it is desired, after the Y-piece or before the Y-piece, in between the inspiratory limb, 15 centimeters before the Y connector. So this is a typical setup for mesh nebulizers. So as far as COVID patients are considered, jet nebulizers are not preferred, but even though some hospitals give nebulization therapy through jet nebulizers, so for those hospitals, the assembly will be similar. This is the T-piece. In this T-piece, the nebulizer chamber will be attached, and this nebulizer requires external gas source. So we can give oxygen about 6 to 8 liters per minute. And then same like MDIs and vibrating mesh technologies, the nebulizer will sit in the inspiratory limb of the ventilator circuit. So for mesh nebulizers, so mesh nebulizers are very delicate to handle. So when handling it and cleaning it, we should be very cautious. The jet nebulizer sits above the patient's ventilator circuit, unlike the the jet nebulizers. So the chances of infection when using mesh nebulizers are very, very minimal. Why? Because it remains in line in the ventilator circuit. You don't need to break the circuit. There's one cap. You have to just open the cap, refill the medicine, and just close the cap. That even if the cap remains open, there will be no leakage from the nebulizer. It just controller powered nebulizer. So you can give any kind of drug through that. Also, the chances while breaking the circuit and to the spreading the infection to the healthcare practitioners is also very, very minimal. Unlike jet nebulizers, to refill the chamber, we need to open the disconnect it from the ventilator. So the chances of spreading the infection to the environment is very, very high. That's why jet nebulizers are very cautiously used in COVID patients. Jet nebulizers. So for jet nebulizer, any nebulizer, first see the order of the physician, then assess the patient, do thorough endotracheal suction, position the patient 45-degree bed elevation, then fill the nebulizer chamber with 4 to 6 ml of drug, then place the nebulizer in the inspiratory limb before the Y connector and turn the gas source on up to 6 to 8 liters flow. Then also in jet nebulizers also we need to remove the HME filter because it can be blocked while delivering the aerosol therapy. So we need to change it regularly. That's why it is preferred that we remove the HME filter before any nebulization therapy. So monitor for adverse effect, and as we are giving external gas flow in jet nebulizers, we need to readjust the alarm setting. So after removing the nebulizer, we have to again do the normal alarm settings in the ventilators and reconnect the HME. So my first slide was also regarding the infection control, and the second last slide will also be regarding the cleaning of the nebulizers. So giving aerosol therapy is very easy, but cleaning is always neglected by all the healthcare professionals, and this increases the chances of infection to the patients as well as to the healthcare professionals who are treating them. The cleaning of jet nebulizers and MDIs is always neglected. So it is very, very important that we follow infection control practices very religiously. So to clean MDIs, we have to just remove the canister and just clean the plastic part once a week, and the spacer also we can just clean it with warm water or just pat it dry and keep it overnight to dry. So for cleaning for MDI is very easy. For jet nebulizers, of course, before handling it, we have to wash our hands, disassemble all the parts. After every treatment, we have to clean the nebulizer, remove the tubing from the compressor as we don't need to clean the tubing, and set it aside. The tubing should not be washed or rinsed because it is difficult to dry. Then rinse the nebulizer cup and mouthpiece with either sterile water or distilled water. This step is very, very important, and which is always neglected, that after each use we have to we have to clean the mouthpiece and the nebulizer cup with sterile water or distilled water. Why? Because there is always some residual present in the nebulizer cup after each nebulizer. If it remains there only in that cup, there are high chances of pathogens to grow in that chamber. So for respiratory patients, it is the worst which can happen. So we have to always clean the nebulizer chamber after every use. Then after cleaning it with sterile water or distilled water, shake it well and remove the excess water, air dry or an absorbent towel, and always store the nebulizer cup in a zippered plastic bag. This step is also very important to store the nebulizer cup, the entire nebulizer kit, let it be any nebulizer, in a zippered plastic bag. So thank you. This was about aerosol therapy in COVID patients.
Thank you, Sneha. It was a very informative session. I hope you have answered a lot of questions to the audience. I would also like to request the audience to put their questions in the chat box, which would be answered at the end of the session. And thank you, Sneha, once again. Now I would like to go to our second speaker. We have here Mr. Abudallah Hanfi, who will be talking on prone ventilation in COVID-19. Over to you, Miss Abu. Mr. Abu, sorry.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, Abu, you're audible.
Yeah, I'm audible.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I would like to thank, I would like to take opportunity to thanks IRC Maharashtra chapter for giving me this wonderful platform. And today my topic is actually prone positioning, which is like very helpful for in during COVID session. So from 7 months we are working so hard to make the recovery to improve oxygenation as a respiratory therapist. So I'm going to start with the discussion. So we have a certain topic I'm going to discuss with regarding the introductions, goal of prones, mechanics, some indications, contraindications, some potential complications, algorithms, and the turning procedure, how we have to turn the positions in the COVID. So introduction is like a maneuver. What is actually prone positioning? So it's a maneuver done to the manage severe hypoxia, and it is a strategy to improve oxygenation. So we are going to improve the oxygenation, and it's like a very big role in COVID. Like we want to improve the oxygenation because of severe ARDS. So goal of prone positioning is to improve oxygenations, to improve respiratory mechanics, and homogeneous pleural pressure gradients, somewhere like alveolar inflations and ventilations, to facilitate the drainage of the secretions and reduce the valley. So what is actually in prone positioning and the supine positioning? What is happening? What is the mechanics actually? So during mechanical ventilation in the supine position, the pleural pressure which drives the chest wall and lift up the ventral chest wall. So everyone know that when we sleep on the like on flat surface, the ventral, the upper chest will get expanded rather than the dorsal surface, the back surface. So we have it has a little effect on the dorsal chest wall, which lies in the contact with the firm supporting surface. So respiratory mechanics in the prone positioning is what? Actually, the prone positioning, the ventral chest goes down. So patient is totally turn on the like abdominal and thoracic pressure. Will like patient will be on abdomen and thorax. So the prone position in the ventral chest wall is a less compliant due to the firm surface of the bed, thereby reducing the expansion. And this position lead to the expansion of the dorsal chest wall more than ventral, thereby improving oxygen. So you can see I have a small example. I have a filled with the bottle with a fluid. So if you turn, if this is in ventral surface is upstairs and the dorsal surface is in this. So the alveoli is not getting the ventilation in a proper manner because the fluid is accumulated. So when we do a proning, patients come like the patients come in the ventral surface gone down and the dorsal surface came out. So this area is getting a ventilated. So what is like when do you see prone positioning? So in everyone know very well, I think so. We all are respiratory therapists and severe ARDS. So severe ARDS means what? So we have a three types of ARDS, like mild, moderate, and severe. In severe ARDS, we have to prone the patients. If you have failure of the like improving the lung protective strategies, so lung protective strategies means what? Like a low tidal volume, high PEEP. And sometimes when we fail during a lung recruitment maneuver, so that time also we prone the patients. So if the PF ratio is a for COVID guidelines, we have if the PF ratio is less than 150 with a PEEP requirement of 10 centimeter. So at that time also we have to prone the patients. And when the like a reduction or reduce the lung compliant, that time also we have to prone the patients. So when do you not use the prone positioning? So it's a very big questions. Everyone have to know this is a like proning better to getting the like what is the co and cons. So like facial neck trauma or spinal instability, we don't have to prone the patients. Recent any sternectomy or a large ventral surface burn, elevated intracranial pressures, and massive hemoptysis. So high risk of CPR and defibrillation. That means it should be like something like arrhythmias. That patient is getting like a ventricular tachycardia, ventricular fibrillations, or if the patient is getting like some irregular rhythm, so we have to take care of that, then only we can prone the patients. So abdominal or any thoracic surgery, so we have to take care of that, because abdominal pressure is going, patient is going to be totally on the abdominal pressure and the chest pressure, so we have to take care of that. Maybe chances of like oozing of the blood and that other co and cons can come. So what is a checklist? So everyone know the proning. So it's very important, the checklist. Everything is having a checklist. So we have to take care of the contraindication of prone positioning. So contraindication is what? Is there any fracture? If it is facial or a pelvic fractures, burn or an open wound, if it is any open wound on your ventral surface. So we have to take care of that also. Either patient is not get the proning and all. So condition associated with the spinal instability, like we can say like a rheumatic arthritis or any trauma, and condition associated with the increase the intracranial pressure. If the patient is having any surgery of like a brain or like SGH and all. So we have to take care of that. So very important that we have to see before proning is the gross hemodynamic instability. So you have to check the patient is in an hypotension or the patient is having any hypertension or a tachycardia, tachypnea, bradycardia or bradypnea. So you have to follow up all the things. Then only we can prone the patients. So consider the possible adverse effect of the like prone positioning on the chest tube drainage. So if the patient is on chest tube drainage, we have to take care how we are going to prone the patients. Explain the maneuver to the patients and the family because it's their rights to get to know like what maneuver we are going and how we are treating the patients. Confirm the endotracheal tube of locations 2 to 4 centimeter above the carina. So you have to do the x-ray before and we have to check the x-ray like morning also. If you can do, you can check the x-ray like what is the positioning of the carina. So second checklist is what. So we have to before turning the patients, we have to check the consider how the patient head, neck and shoulder will be supported after turning the position. So it's very important because if a small twist will happen, that maybe the spinal some injury you can get or some problem can happen. So it's better you have to pre-plan. Maybe some people keep the jelly pad, some are keeping some like padded, some are making with the gauze pieces. So you have to take care of that also. Stop tube feeding. So you have to take care of this tube feeding also. The patient will not take like a before like a pre like 1 hour before we don't take like a feeding at all. So we have to cap the NG tube and we have to take care of the we can clamp the also. Prepare the endotracheal suctioning equipments. So should the vacuums, tubings, catheters, the pressure average should be there because maybe chances of if any copious secretions will be there. So we have to take care of the patients like we are going to take a right side or a left side. We have to take care of that also. We have to decide before proning the patients. So prepare all intravenous tubings. So if the patient is having a central line, if the patient is having an arterial line, if the patient is having any peripheries line, so you have to take care of that also because we are before proning, we disconnect all the things. So you have to reconnections, you have to take care of that also. So like what is the turning procedure? So we are going to take like first step is staffing. Staffing is very important. So for COVID, we are taking a minimal staff. It's like a 5 people, including a respiratory therapist, a team member to introduce themselves, the state their roles. So you have to explain all the team members like what their role is like, how they are going to do. The respiratory therapist position at the head end. So the respiratory therapist go on the head end, took care of the tube, took care of the like neck, took care of the movement of the whole ventilator tubing and the endotracheal tubing. And the headed end person, the respiratory therapist or airway doctor, will take care of the coordinations between all of them. So at least two other either side of the patients, but more of be required depend on the size of the patient. So we have to keep two more staff standby or somewhere because maybe chances of the patient is having very heavy load or the patient size is more. So we have to take care of that also. So additional staff allocated to the manage of the chest drainage if it is inside. So if the patient's having a chest drain or ICD is placed on the patient's chest because now a COVID scenario, the patient is getting a pneumo because of higher PEEP. So we have to take care of that also. So you have to keep additional staff for the tube care. Positioning, how you're going to give a position. The patient should be in, you can see in the diagram, the patient is on flat surface, is in supine. Patient is totally neutral surface, neutral patient was sleeping. The arm close to the ventilator and trunk underneath the buttock with the palm. So it should be the like your palm should go under the buttock because that elbow movement and the shoulder grid movement will not happen. Maybe the chances of dislocation. So you have to take care of that also. You can see in the diagram the how the like the palm is going under the buttock. So we have to remove all the leads or any liners are there. So we have to take care of that also. If you want to keep a pillow before proning a patient, so pillow if required can be placed over the chest, iliac chest, crest or a knees. So they should be placed strategically according to the patient bone habitus and reduce the pressures placed upon the abdomen. So you have to take care of the patients. We are going to keep our one pillow on your chest and second on your abdomen, in your iliac crest. The patient wrapping. So how you have to wrap the patient and how we are going to move. So patient wrapping is also, it's a very big important role. The clean the bed sheet. The bed sheet should be clean, should be placed on the top of the patient's on your till from the shoulder to the toe. So the edges from the top and bottom bed sheet are rolled tightly. So you can see in the diagram. So the first they apply the pillow, they kept the on the shoulder and the iliac crest and on the knees, and then they are rolling. So each side they have to roll the bed sheet and tightly way. The head end should be open. That airway, we have to take care of the airway as well as. So this is for the wrapping process. For the step 4, we have a horizontal move. So how we are going to move the patients? Keep the bed sheet pulled taut and the edges rolled. So one side we have to pull the. So before that we have to take care of the tubes, the on the side, and the count of 1, 2, 3. Then only we have to pull the patients from one edges to another edges. So you have to take care of that. The direction of the horizontal move should be away the ventilator. The tube should be on this side. If the ventilator is there, you have to take care of the ventilator and the tube with the vice versa. We have to take care of that also. So direction of the horizontal move should be away from the ventilator in the opposite direction which the patient will be turned. So lateral turn, we have to take the patients on the edges, and then we have to take a call to make a lateral. So some are say like a 90 degrees, some are say the pull up to the lateral position. So you have to take care of that also. So staff on either side should then adjust their hand position on the roll, because one person is pulling down and one person is taking up. So we have to take care of that also. Who is going to pull down and who is going to take care of upstairs? Because of rolling, we can make the patient on the proning. So that they now have the hold of opposite edges with the compare the horizontal move. So you can say the patient is on 90 degree. On the call of the person, the head end, the roll of the sheet in the pull up the beneath the patient's, while the patient is carefully turned into the prone. So now patient is totally prone. So carefully support the head and neck. So we have to take care of the head and neck, and the ventilator and the patient is moved from the lateral to the prone position. So now the patient is on prone position. Ensure this. So first of all, the role is what? So we have to take care of the ET tube. So what ET tube is kinking or ET tube disconnection. So we have to see the CO2 tracing, ET CO2 tracing. So if the ET CO2 tracing is present, that means tube is secure. So we are secure. So now note the length of the ET tube on the lip. It should be not at the corner. So we have to take care of the ET tube length also. That when we prone, before prone, we have to check the tube like is placed on 22 or a 21. So on the loop movement is present or not, because mild of the during prone the patient can get accidental extubations. So you have to take care of that also. So reattach the ECG leads. So after getting a prone and head is stable, the shoulder is stable. So now we have to attach the leads and the saturation probe. So you have to attach the electrodes and the saturation probe so that we can monitor the patient is getting enough saturation, the patient is not getting any arrhythmias, or we have to connect the arterial line or the BP cuff that we can see the patient is not getting any hypotension. Because of a certain compression on the chest or abdominal compression, the patient might be getting in the hypotension or a certain arrhythmia. So you have to take care of that also. So positioning, 7th step is positioning. Ensure the patient is in center of the bed and remove the slide sheet, ensuring the counter traction on the patient to prevent them to sleep off the bed. So you have to take the patient should be on the center of the bed, because we are going to make the patient's head in a swimmer position. So we have to make a patient's head both hand on the swimmer position. So carefully position the arm in the swimmer position. This involves raising one arm on the same side of which the head is facing while placing the arm by the patient's side. The shoulder should be abducted to the 80% and the elbow of 70% on the raised hand. Some people keep one hand up and one hand down. Some are keeping both up. So you have to take care of that, what protocol is going on in your hospital. The position of the both hand and arm should be alternate every 2 to 4 hours. The patient should be nursed at 30 degree to reverse the Tendelbar position. After making a patient on the connecting all the leads, making the abdominal pressure, checking the abdominal pressure, checking the thoracic pressures, the patient's lung movements, we have to take care of the patients. The whole bed go in the 30 degree up, so it will quite helpful for the oxygenation and ventilations. So we have to one of the big last step, we have a step 8, pressure care. Pressure care is a very important role during a prone, because we are making patients to the totally a different direction on a proning side. So ensure the optimal positioning of the pillow tailored to the patient's body habitus. So we have to take care of that. The pressure area should be meticulous checked. So we have an elbow. The elbow area is going to be this area is going to be pressurized. We have to take care of the, because we are keeping this, so this area will not get infected. So we have the knee and your a toe is going to be pressurized. So we have to take care of that too. So what we do, we keep a jelly pad. We have a certain jelly pad that is going to helpful for the patients to get not getting that sore and all. So no direct pressure on the eyes. So we, before proning, we have to take care of eyes. So we have to keep gauze pieces on your eyes and tape it that properly, because that because of certain pressure on your facial, like facial edema you can get. So for that you have to take care of that eye sore you will not get. So you because of that you have to tape the patient with the micropore and the gauze pieces. It should be a sterile. So ear bent over, so you have to take care of the patient. Like during prone you can see the patient's one side is totally a turn, so you have to take care of the ear also. It should not be turned. ETT is not pressed again the corner of the mouth, as again I'm going to tell. So it should be checked, the ETT should be not on the corner of the lip. It could be like you can get the you can get the cut mark, or you can get the necrosis or something. Nasogastric tube also not pressed against the nostril, because maybe some chance like a positioning of this, so it will get that the nostril will get a rupture or something, problems can get. So you have to take care of the nostril and nasogastric tube as well as. So you have to like penis hanging between the legs with the catheter secure. So we have to take care of the urine catheter as well as, and the urine bag as well as, so that penis will not hang like not get any injured. So we have to check the lines and tubing not pressurized against the skin, because the patient is going to improve. So you have to take care of the all intravenous line that will not get a effect to in skin. So now you can see like a sequential effect on prone positioning. So you can see the ventral surface, as before we discussed regarding, I just explain you regarding this. So you can see the ventral surface, the ventral area is getting a less perfused, and rather than you can see in the dorsal area that more alveoli is getting inflated. So if the alveoli is going to reopen, so you can see in the diagram both difference. You can see that if the patient is prone, that more alveoli is going to reopen because of giving a PEEP and the pressures. So you can see in the CT scan also as well as. So this is like how we have a CT scan. In this you can see the dorsal surface of the in supine position, that getting a less inflated, and rather than if you see in the prone position, that dorsal surface is getting more more oxygenation, means more alveoli is going to open. So we know like how we do proning procedures. Everyone we have to know, but when to stop proning is also when a big important word we can say. When to stop proning, when the PF ratio remain more than 150 mmHg 4 hours after supinating. Means what? Like if the PF ratio is more than 150 and we supine the patients after proning to supine be done, and the patient is after 4 hours we take a ABG. If the patient's ABG shows like more than 150 PF ratio, that means we don't have to prone next cycle. We don't have to prone a next cycle. So optimal strategy is unclear still now. Like consider continue proning until clear the improvement of gas exchange and mechanics and overall clinic crutches courses. So we have to target plasma. The pH should be like more than 7.20 and less than 7.45. The average prone session duration should be 16 to 17 hours. It's a ProSeva guidelines which shows that oxygenation improves if the patient is in prone to 16 to 17 hours. So tidal volume should be like 6 ml per kg, and the target oxygenation should be like a 55 to 80 mmHg. So that there is like some potential complications. So while proning, you can see the brachial flexures. Just a minute. So you can see the brachial flexures injury. You can see the elevated abdominal pressure because we prone the patient can get. So intragastric residuals, AT tube kinking, as we know very well, and the vascular catheter kinking, and facial edema. So that's why I told you like when you're making the patient prone, so you have to take care of the everything. So like should be like not get a pressure sure everywhere. Thank you for hearing. If you have any suggestion, please let us know. Thank you for hearing me. Hello.
Yes, thank you, Abu. It was very knowledgeable and enlightening, and rather it was also very explanatory.
Yeah.
I still request our audience, if they have any questions, I would request them to please put in the chat box. We will be answering it at the end of the session. I would now request Mr. Ashish Yadav to take over the session. Over to you, Mr. Ashish.
Hello.
Yes, Ashish, you're audible.
Yes. Uh, First of all, I would like to thank first. Hello. Good evening, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank IARC, Madhura Gauri ma'am, and yeah. Hello. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Am I audible?
Yes, Ashish,
Yeah.
you're audible. Go ahead.
Uh, good, good evening, all. First of all, I would like to thank Madhura Gauri ma'am, Indian Association of Respiratory Care, for giving me this opportunity to talk on the Respiratory Week 2020. So, as today I'll be starting with the topic of pulmonary rehabilitation in ICU. Uh, First, I'll be talking about, as Sneha ma'am has already said, that hand hygiene plays a very, very important role in infection control practices. So we should ideally first look after the hand hygiene before touching the patient, before and after doing a septic or a septic procedure. Third is after the fluid exposure. After Fourth is after touching to the patient, and fifth is after touching the patient surface area or the surrounding. So before we start with the pulmonary rehabilitation, first we should understand what does a rehabilitation means. So pulmonary rehabilitation is defined as a multidisciplinary uh, intervention based on the patient's evaluation and the treatment, which includes but which is not limited to the education, training, behavioral modifications, and modifications designed to improve physical and psychological conditions of the people with respiratory distress. So, if we see what would be the goals, so the first goal of a pulmonary rehabilitation would be reduce the work of breathing. Second would be the airway clearance, which is reduce secretions, retention, which can cause atelectasis and pneumonia. And third are is relieve anxiety, and which there is one more, actually we have two more, which includes improving quality of the life to the patient. This plays a very, very vital role, and also reducing the complications which we foresee in the ICU. As we see the patients who are on ventilator, the goals of rehabilitation to them is maintaining or recruiting the lung volumes. Second would be optimizing oxygenation and ventilation. Third is improving compliance, ventilation, perfusion mismatch, which is nothing but a VQ mismatch, which is gonna lead to increase in the patient's oxygenation level as well as the perfusion of the patient. Third is decreasing ventilator dependency and improving patient's residual capacity for functional residual capacity, improving respiratory muscle strength, which may be caused due the patient is on due to the on a long-term mechanical ventilation in COVID, reducing the post-operative complications. So after looking at this, if we see there are several phases in COVID scenario which we are seeing. First one is the acute phase, which is nothing but very severe respiratory conditions. in these conditions, our first thing which is we are not supposed to is airway clearance technique, which is not recommended during this acute phase in the COVID, majorly due to because of bronchial obstructions. So what all things we can do? So things we can do are is ventilating support or weaning, monitoring of the clinical conditions, parameters and sign, adjustment of the mechanical support, oxygen therapy, extubation protocol with or without NIV or CPAP, and treating acute respiratory failures with by an NIV, or weaning the mechanical ventilation by seeing the ARDS.net protocol, which is PEEP FiO2 reduction strategy. And now, as we see in acute phase, rehabilitative interventions to be done when there is a minimal clinical stability of the patient. So at this point of time, we need to think that treatment should be withdrawn in which cases. So as we can see, the treatment should be withdrawn when there is a high grade fever, when there is a cardiorespiratory distress, dyspnea, bradycardia, tachycardia, patient is in tachypnea, incurrent arrhythmia, shock, or hypotension. When the patient is desaturating, the saturation is below 90% on a oxygen requirement of more than 50% on NIV, or PEEP or CPAP requirement more than 10 centimeters of S2O, or the patient is in deep sedation, or there could be a new finding in an X-ray which is more than 50% the X-ray has been deteriorated within 24 to 48 hours. So as we can see, now we are going into, now as we have seen the what the things when we are supposed to stop, or when we are not supposed to do the pulmonary rehabilitation in the COVID. But now we are into when are we supposed to, what could be the criteria, what could be the starting criteria, and what could be the stopping criteria in the ICU for the COVID patients. So we are going to see this according to the system wise. So if we see the starting criteria in the cardiovascular system, the heart rate should be between 60 to 130 beats per minute. Your systolic BP should be 90 to 80, or the mean arterial pressure should be between 60 to 100 mm of Hg. In respiratory system, the patient should not be in the bradypnea, or the patient should not be the tachypnea. The rate should not be above 40 breaths per minute. The patient saturation should not be maintaining less than 88%, which is very, very important, because if the saturation goes down, the patient may go into respiratory fatigue, and that is going to lead into respiratory failure again. Use of PEEP, if the PEEP is used more than 10 centimeters of S2O, so the PEEP is less than 10. So if the PEEP is less than 10, so this is the criteria in which we can include the patients. And GCS, improving GCS, or GCS more than 10. So this is a starting criteria which we can see. Now, what is the stopping criteria? If you go and see in the stopping criteria, the cardiovascular system, the BP, the heart rate less than 60, which is bradycardia, or a heart rate with more than 130, tachycardic patient. Systolic BP less than 90 or more than 180. So the patient should not be in the hypotension or the hypertension, and the mean arterial pressure should not be less than 60 or 100. In respiratory system, again, the patient clinically, the patient should be able to breathe the adequate respiratory breath, which also includes no tachypnea or the bradypnea. The patient should maintain the saturation SpO2 above 88%. You should always make sure that there is no dislodgement of airway during the rehabilitative process. So and there is one more scale which is known as Boggs dyspnea scale. If your Boggs dyspnea scale is more than 3, which is very, very important, which is going to tell you whether the patient is going into respiratory fatigue or the dyspnea patient, so the patient will land up into respiratory failure. Others, there's a change in consciousness, new symptomatic arrhythmia before starting the before or after starting the rehabilitation, chest pain, ventilated dysynchrony, patient intolerance or refusal, or the patient is agitated, due to which the patient is removing the medical device. So now if we see what all process we need to do in the rehabilitative therapy. So our rehabilitation therapy in severe or critically ill patients of COVID-19 mainly includes, one is the major but the commonest one is position management. Another one is early mobilization and physical exercises. And third is our respiratory exercises. Last but not the least, again, which is physical exercises. So once we start with the, so first we'll start with position management. Your position management may be preferable over the other techniques like postural drainage given the pathophysiology of the COVID-19, and also observe the VQ mismatch. Sitting and standing are the preferred positions in the non-critically ill patients to maximize uh, lung functions, including FVC, increasing lung compliance, and elastic recoil and shift mediastinal structures provide mechanical advantage in the force expiration. So when we see in position management, there are three major positions. First is the patient is supine and propped up. So as we can see, the patient is supine and propped up. Over here, the image, the both upper and apical segments are getting drained and ventilated very much properly. And as the patient is in propped up position, but the patient's angle is around 45 degrees. So our left lobe and anterior segments again are getting drained, and so when we go the patient on supine angle and but the patient is in 0 degrees, right lobe and the upper anterior segments hips are the external rotations, so there is the position should be perfect so that the various segments of the lung should get the properly drained. So in our next, as we go, this was all about the supine positions. As we go in the prone and lateral positions, the moment the patient goes semilateral, the left upper and lingual lobes are getting drained in the either in right or in the left. As the patient goes prone, the patient's upper lobe and the posterior segments, the which are the major, which are holding the secretions and the oxygenation, which is also which doesn't happen when the patient is in the supine position. So these are the changes you will see by giving a different positions by, so you can drain the patient by looking at the pathophysiology of the lung. And our next is early mobilization and physical exercises. Early mobilization and physical exercises now are playing one of the major roles, because now in our ICU in SL Raja Hospital during COVID, we are also mobilizing the patients on HFNC. With HFNC, we are mobilizing them, and with the patients are on helmet CPAP mask, we are also mobilizing the patients with this skill. So what is, so first thing what we should do in early mobilization is this aggressive monitoring, which is absolutely required to prevent tubing detachment, and vital monitoring should be done entire process. So there should be a one person standing right near the patient to see whether there's a detachment or, and for the vital signs management. Second thing which we need to see is the intensity. How much should be the intensity should be doing. The lower strength, duration or activity scope can be used in the patient with poor physical fitness, but the patient only needs to complete the movement. So you need to complete the patient's movement, whether by doing some limb exercises. As an example, in physical exercises, if you see the limb physiotherapy which we do, that can also be very, very beneficial for the patients. Now, we are doing all this physical exercise in early mobilization, but what should be the duration amount or the time? So the total duration for a single session should not exist more than 30 minutes, because nor the patient should get exacerbated or fatigueness. So if you find your patient is getting fatigued during this process, you should stop the early mobilization right there. And we should make sure at least twice you are giving a early mobilization or a physical exercises for 30 minutes to the patient at the bedside. So now what are the techniques could be used in the early mobilization in the patient? First is sitting on the bed, which could be including edge of the bed. So what we have been doing and seeing in the patients with COVID-19 is that the moment you try and mobilize them even on the edge of the bed, they start getting desaturated and getting tachypneic. So we are using a quite a different technique to do. So what we are doing is currently we are pre-oxygen. Suppose your patient is on Hudson mask with 8 liters of O2. So what we are doing just prior the mobilization, we are taking the patient on NRBM and pre-oxygenated them for 3 minutes. And so after the 3 minutes, we are trying to take the patient on NRBM and mobilize and sit them on the edge of the bed. After that, we are looking after the clinical parameters and cardiac monitoring. While the patient, we have mobilized them completely now. We are also giving the post-mobilization oxygenation for 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, we are taking the patient back on the supplemental O2, which was the patient was on. So this is how we are trying to maintain in by doing this technique. What we have seen is that the patient would not get desaturated, the patient is not getting tachycardic or the tachypneic. So we are, by using this method, we are getting a successful mobilization at the on the bedside. So here, as I was saying, the first technique is sitting on the bed or the edge of the bed. Then after that, once you see the all of your parameters and clinical stability is present, you can take the patient moving out of the bed to the chair. So your next step is, first you should take the patient on the bed at the edge of the bed. Then we are taking the bed to the chair. Later on, when you find that good stability is there, after a few days, we can progress and take a patient to stand up. So we can make patient standing up. Again, we are looking at all the parameters. There would be some kind of tension. If the patient is standing up, the patient may also go into hypotension. So these all things we are need to look after it. And there is no one else except the respiratory therapist who would be looking after all the things. So once you are done and you see now you have given standing up position for 2 more days, and the last step is nothing but stepping. So after standing up, and there is a low minimal requirement of the oxygen to the patient, now we have titrated oxygen at a good level. Patient is maintaining a desired saturation, whichever we wanted, by at least 88% or the 90% of the patients. So now you can do a next step is stepping. So our technique stance is like, first you should take the patient sitting at the edge of the bed. Second is moving out of the bed to the chair. Third is standing up, and four is start stepping on the walk, and we should make the patient to walk. So as for the new guidelines and the new NCBI research, which was done in June 2020, we have seen that stretching is playing one of the very most important role. We should encourage the patient to do stretching at least 3 times a day. Now, what are the base? If you see why we should ask the patient to do stretching, what is the benefits? They have seen that stretching has been shown to increase compliance by 50 ml. So it's a least increase in compliance, but at least there is some amount of increase in compliance is going to later on help to the patient. So we should encourage patient to do stretching 3 times a day. Which all stretching we should include? First is neck, upper chest. Third is pectoralis major. There is lateral chest stretches, flexions, extension to mobilize their fascial joints. And fifth is what we have seen, the dorsal chest wall has been shown to the less compliant in the patients with ARDS. Now we'll go on our third and last but not the least topic, which is respiratory exercises. So which all exercises we should include? So why we need to do the respiratory exercise? First is the airway clearance, which is most important to increase the residual capacity of the patient, as well as we also want the patient's oxygenation to be titrated and switched off completely. So our first technique is high frequency chest wall oscillation. This technique could be used to mobilize the secretions. We can use the maximum 17 megahertz of chest wall oscillations to remove the to move the secretion clearance. And our next is oscillatory positive expiratory pressure trainer, which is OPEP. What are the devices which come under this? First is Acapella and vibrator PEP device. So Acapella, we've been using Acapella, it's been like 4 to 6 months to the patient. Acapella has shown a great results in the patients who has cough. And as we have been seeing, there are several patients with expectoration, which are those who have mucus present. So Acapella has been used, and it has been helped us very, very finely. So how many times you can use Acapella? We can use 3 sets a day, and we can use 10 reps each. Means each set includes 10 reps twice a day. Acapella is very, very beneficial. Then there is chest physiotherapy, even though this is very, very controversial topic, that chest physiotherapy, hand percussion or the hand vibration therapy is one of the aerosol generating procedure. But by doing this, the chest physiotherapy is helping a lot, but you need to take your personal protective measures before doing the chest physio and chest vibration therapy. And our fourth topic, exercise, would be incentive spirometer. Incentive spirometer, we are actually doing very, very, sometimes we are performing incentive spirometer on HFNC, and the patient who was on high flow nasal cannula with a high flow, with a high oxygen requirement, which is extremely wrong. We should not be doing that. We should always do incentive spirometer when the patient is off HFNC. So always try when the patient is on Hudson mask or the patient is on nasal prawns. You should try and encourage the patient to perform incentive spirometer at that point of time, whether they're not on HFNC. Because if you use HFNC, is the patient is already on high flow, and plus you're gonna give a inspiratory flow by a incentive spirometer, that is gonna do nothing but a lung injury to the patient. And so encourage patient for doing incentive spirometer twice, doing at least every hourly when the oxygenation has come down for 5 minutes, which is, this is the method which we are doing in SL Raheja Hospital. Our fifth exercise is active cycle breathing. Even though active cycle breathing, if it is not been evidence, there is no such evidence which of the active cycle breathing or the which breathing exercise will help to the patient, but it is for sure that active cycle breathing is helping. And even though sometimes if you see that your patient's box scale is going more than 3, but the patient is still on the low oxygen level, so at that point of time you can ask your patient to perform pursed lip breathing. Pursed lip breathing has helped the patient to reduce their tachypnea and work of breathing. So if you see, there is a pursed lip breathing control. It has been done for at least 20 to 30 seconds. Then there is a deep breathing cycles for 3. Again, there is a pursed lip breathing control 20 to 30. Then there is again breathing cycles, pursed lip. So these are the 3 steps: pursed lip breathing, deep breathing cycles, pursed lip control breathing. Again, with and last, in the last, we should encourage the patient for the huff and cough breathing, because that is what is gonna help the patient for the secretions mobilization and to throw it out of the lungs. As now we have seen in the acute patients, so the acute phase severe conditions, evaluation and monitoring must be conducted from the initiation until the completion of respiratory rehabilitation. So what are we supposed to do when the patient is on ventilator? So we have seen the patient is the patient who are not on ventilator, on NIV, on HFNC. But when the patient is on ventilator, what we are supposed to do? This is actually a severe condition. So we'll see that first is ventilation support and weaning. So in that we'll see monitoring of clinical condition parameters, hemodynamic stability is very important. Adjustment and titration of oxygen therapy is to be seen. Chest physiotherapy, in chest physiotherapy, if non-productive cuff should be sedated to avoid the fatigueness of the patient. Bronchial clearance techniques are indicated in hypersecretive patients in chronic respiratory disease. And to further disability preventions, we should always see and do this mobilization, positioning, active limb exercises, and muscle reconditioning, neuromuscular electrical stimulation, respiratory muscle training in case of there is an inspiratory muscle weakness. Now, we're going to see about the post-acute phase. Now, we have seen the severe patients, then we have seen very severe, we have seen severe. Now, we'll see the what are the post-acute phase, the post-discharge from acute care to a intermediate setting, or we can say the patient is moving from ICU to an ward. So in mild and ordinary patients after discharge, suppose, so mainly it consists of improving physical fitness and psychological adjustment. We should not forget the psychological adjustments are also to be taken care of. It is a very, very crucial and important thing to look after. Progressive exercise advised are aerobics, deep breathing exercises, and your active cycle breathing exercises. Now, in post-acute phase, the patients who are post-discharge from acute care to an intermediate setting, but these patients are severely or critically ill patients, the patients are after discharge. Which all patients can be there? The patients who are on tracheostomized. Okay, so weaning monitoring of parameters, very, very important. Hemodynamic stability is very important. Mechanical ventilation weaning in tracheostomized patient. Management of problems related to tracheostomy, which may include phonations, uh, presence of secretion which is there, and adjustment of oxygen therapy. In chest physiotherapy, again we need to look after bronchial clearance techniques which are need to be followed very, very crucially. And in disability prevention, mobilization, po- positioning, and getting the patient out of bed, active limb exercises, neuromuscular electrical stimulation, respiratory muscle training in case of inspiratory muscle weakness. So now we have done with the rehabilitation program, but since the patient has moved out from the ICU to the ward, and from to the ward to the home, at his home, so the reassessment should be done after a time. As a minimum, the assessments made at the completion of pulmonary rehab should be repeated at the completion of the program, because we need to see what amount of changes, how much amount of lungs has been improved, how much has been clinical stability the patient has, which may include clinical tests first, which is physical examination, lab examinations, lung function, PFTs could be done, nutrition screening, imaging may include chest X-ray, lung ultrasound, or CT scans or the HRCT. Exercises and respiratory functions also need to be monitored, which we can do by 6-minute walk test, respiratory muscle strength, fluid functional evaluations, physical activity evaluations, and joint trauma. And in the end, evaluation of activities from day-to-day life, how much the patient is getting fatigue, or whether the patient is able to perform his day-to-day life, which is very, very important. The rehabilitation is all about the patient should live his day-to-day life in the condition the patient has been through, or the patient has been faced. Thank you. I'd like to thank IARC for giving me this opportunity and for this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashish. It was really magnificent and unique. We had indeed got to know a lot of things about pulmonary rehabilitation, what all you said. And of course, we are practicing in our intensive care unit in SL Raheja. Now the forum is open for question and answer session. We have a couple of questions already in the chat box. I would moderate those questions, and I would request our speaker to answer those questions. And I would still request the audience, in case if there are any questions, they can put in the chat box. So the first question we have is from Ms. Neha regarding the inhalation therapy. She has very rightly explained about the vibrating mesh technology, okay, for using of AeroNeb nebulizers, okay, under Aerogen technology. So we would like to know about the reuse of those nebulizers. You have shown us about the cleaning procedures of reusing, but can we reuse those nebulizers for different patients? Okay, of course we can use it for the same patient by cleaning it. Okay, but can we send it for say ETO, or we can clean it and then reuse it for another patient?
Okay, so for mesh nebulizers, there are two models. Which one model is which we can reuse to another patients also. It is called Pro. So it can be autoclaved. It is a reusable model, and one is disposable model, that is single patient use device. So that we cannot uh, disinfect it, just we can clean it and use it on the same patient. We cannot disinfect it, but the one which is reusable, that we can definitely autoclave.
Okay, thank you, Sneha. I hope she has answered your questions. We have another question for you, Sneha. Uh, we would like to ask you that whether we can use the inhalation therapy for non-intubated patients. Uh, since you have specified about using of inline nebulizers in the intubated patients, we would like to know about the use of inhalation therapy more
Okay,
in
so
non-intubation patients.
And
as
also, if I can interrupt, I'm sorry. If you
yeah,
can also talk about the use of uh, inhalation therapy during COVID in non-intubated
Non-intubated.
patients.
yes, so as far as nebulization therapy is considered for a non-intubated patient, if the patient has any comorbidities like asthma, COPD, then bronchodilator therapy can be definitely administered. But as we know that COVID is a airborne disease, so in these patients we try as far as possible, where there is no need, then we don't give aerosol therapy on the regular basis. So we have to use it very cautiously for the patients who are spontaneously breathing. I hope I answered it.
Thank you, Sneha. We have another last question for you. Can we use the combination of the drugs, okay, with the aerogen nebulizers, especially in the
Uh,
vibrating mesh technology?
yes, we can use any drug which is prescribed for inhalation therapy, whether it be combined or anything, through mesh nebulizers.
Thank you, Sneha. It was
Welcome.
wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure to be here and speak. I want to thank IRC and Madhura ma'am specially to giving me this opportunity.
So now I will take over the again the question answer session. We have another question for Mr. Abu. That is proning helpful if the lungs are completely fibrosed? We have this question from the audience in the chat box. So again, I'm repeating: is proning helpful if the lungs are completely fibrosed? If you see the scan and if you see that there are fibrotic scarring being very much visible in the CT scan, okay, in that cases, and especially those who are intubated. So will it be helpful if you prone those patients? This is the
So if
question.
actually what we are following, it's like giving a certain prone, it's like a 5 cycle we are providing. So if lung is like a totally fibrosed, and as you mentioned that completely fibrosed, so it's not going to show like improvement for lung wise or oxygenation wise. But we can say like we are trying to give a certain cycle, like a 5 cycle to 7 cycle proning. It might can go, but as a like on different articles or a research paper shows that it doesn't have any effect of proning in fibrous patients.
Yes, of course.
Tropholizes
So
it.
very well said that way that since the lungs are anyways fibrosed, like totally damaged, so even if you prune the patient, there will be no much effect, okay, in terms of improving saturation and in terms of overall lung recovery.
Yep.
Also, we have another question, okay, in terms of if you can brief little about awake proning, okay, if you
Yeah.
can speak about very briefly about how you do the awake proning.
So as I like a different articles and different research, as again I just want to share that like nowadays like many hospitals are doing like awake proning research. So as our hospital also tried to give like a 60 patients, we got a good results like awake proning of patients. If the patient is like having like more than 2 liter of oxygen, and the patient should be prone from themselves, or we can just explain them what proning and how is going to helpful. And the second thing I can share to you to all is that awake pruning is very helpful for nowadays in COVID scenario. So if the patient is having like on NIV, or we can say if the patient is on high flow, or if the patient is on nasal prone or a normal mask, so we can prone the patient in awake, and we are getting a good results, and with a good improving of the PF ratio and the oxygenation.
Okay, Abu, thank you. We have last question for you. Okay, which is just my personal question. Okay, that whether we can prone the patients who are tracheostomized post intubation, when I mean maybe after 10 days when the elective tracheostomy of course is done. Okay, and at that time, if you think to prone the patient, are there any procedures, protocols, or any sort of papers which has been published, or on which you can brief a little about proning in tracheostomized patients?
Thank you for a nice question, sir. It's quite interesting for me, and it's like very recently we got a certain cases. So like if you prone the patients at after certain patient is having like up 10 days and we like do a tracheostomy patient. So if the patient is having a active wound, so if the patient is like a active wound and today only you like for a certain hours like a 4 hours 5 hours, so we have to take care of the, if it is active wound we don't have to prone the patients because patients they has getting the pressurized on that particular area. So it might can the patient can get a bleed. We recently we got like one case, the patient is having a severe PF ratio is too less, so it's like less than 100. So we thought to prone the patients, we tried to do that. The patient is not get patient got bleeds and we again supine the patients. So it's like a one complication we got. We can prone the patients in tracheostomy patients after a certain hours, like a certain protocols and guidelines are going on. So from our hospital is providing is like after 12 hours we can try rather than like after 24 hours we can prone the patients. So for proning of tracheostomy patients, we have to be cautious, like very carefully, because we are going to keep a jelly pad. So we have a different paddles we are going to come. The trachea is like totally secure. The tube is very secure, and we are keeping a closed section. So we have to remove the closed section. We have to take care of the catheter. The what you are going to apply on your shoulders and your neck, it should be like more heighted. The tracheostomy tube is not going to hit your carina or your any other like the injury will not get. So you have to take care of that all. So you have to take a special cautions for keeping a overheaded head and the your shoulder, that the tracheostomy tube will not get affected. So we can do a proning in tracheostomy patients.
Okay, so you mean, of course you can do, but it is since it is dangerous, you have to have a good space between the neck and the bed. Okay, and making sure all this point you can prone the patient.
Yeah, yeah,
Thank you,
yeah. We
Abu.
have to take care of everything.
Thank you,
Thank
Abu.
you for
We
great
have now
opportunity, and
questions.
thank you Akash sir, and thank you for Madhura ma'am for giving me such great opportunity.
Thank you, Abu. It was great having you here. We have Mr. Ashish. Now we have Ashish, and there are questions to Ashish as well. So the very first question for Ashish, which is from a very special person of our IRC, our own ma'am, who's here with us. So and the question is, what are the comorbid condition, okay, we should look and we should keep in mind during rehab and mobilizations? So are there any sort of contraindications or any sort of comorbidities we should keep in mind while performing rehab or mobilizing those patients
In COVID-19.
in COVID? Of course we are talking all of this in COVID-19.
Yes, yes, of course. If you're as we are talking about the comorbidities, so there could be a patients like scoliosis. We may find the patients has a rib detachment, or we may also currently we've been finding the COVID patients which are gone through trauma, and with the femur injury patients we've been seeing in our COVID scenario. So this could be the some of the patients which need to look after, and the patients who has already has a spine injury patients, especially those ones. So those are the ones patients that could we need to look after them, especially while mobilizing them. But I think mobilization for them is also very very important, but we need to take a special care. And looking after the contraindications, for the relevant contraindications, I don't think I have such in my mind, or I know some kind of knowledge. But I think these are the only patients which are the which bedridden patients could be one of the patients which could be the contraindicated patient, or the patients who has a low GCS. Especially recently we had a patient who was bedridden but was spontaneously breathing, but the GCS was extremely low. So this could be a patient which was this could be a contraindication which can look after.
Just to add in this, okay, I would also like to add one more comorbidity or contraindication, which is the presence of deep vein thrombosis, because
Oh,
patients of
yes.
DVT, okay,
Absolutely, sir.
okay, so usually we of course they are more contraindicated for not to mobilize,
Yes.
okay, otherwise there are chances for the thrombus to uh,
Get
pass in
actively
circulation.
pass in the
Yeah.
circulation. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay, Ashish, now we have another question for you. How can we do the post-COVID rehab sessions at home? Okay, what do
Okay.
you think? Suppose if the patient had COVID, he was of course there in the intensive care unit. He was discharged home. Okay, probably the RT-PCR is negative. Okay, and he shifted home probably on say low levels of low flows of oxygen. Okay, what do you think that as a respiratory therapist, if you are visiting at that patient's place, okay, you are going to take care, and what are you going to take care for that particular patient?
So for this question, especially first thing you should need to do is the assessment or the reassessment of the patient is very, very important. As I've already mentioned in my last slide, you need to do the reassessment, physical reassessment, respiratory reassessment, 6-minute walk test, x-rays, labs. First, you need to go after that. Then you need to plan the sessions. For your first session would be planned for around for 6 to 8 weeks. So this would be the first session looking at this. So you need to first do a reassessment before starting your program. Then after you start the program for 6 to 8 weeks, then after the program, you need to assess, you need to reassess again, and you need to check whether what kind of improvement are either we are seeing the FPC, the forced residual capacity is been going out, the residual capacity is being increased, whether there is still inspiratory muscle weakness which has been present, or still the patient is requiring neuromuscular stimulation. So after the 6 to 8 weeks, your reassessment is done. Then after that, once you're assessing, then you will plan a session for next 6 months. So after the moment you need to plan the session for 6 months, after planning a session for 6 months, so every before, prior, and after the session, you need to do the assessment. So your first session would be for around 6 to 8 weeks. Your session, your second session would be after the 6 months after your end of first session, and your third session would be after the 1 year. So accordingly, you need to look after the data assessments, and following that, you need to keep changes into your sessions and plan in the rehabilitative process.
Yes, so of course we have certain scales of what we see in pulmonary rehabilitation, say box scale,
Box
okay,
scale.
and we have respiratory, questionnaires, or we also talk about SGRQ scales, which help us do the assessment of the patients, okay, after certain days of delivery of rehabilitation. So we'll be able to assess after say 1 month that what is the improvement in the quality of life of the patient, and of course with which we'll be able to see that what is the improvement in the patient's ability to do the activities of daily life, okay, with which we'll be of course able to of course home care for post COVID patients will really have help.
Yes, yes, sir, absolutely.
Thank you, Ashish.
Thank you so much.
It was really good to have you here. uh, I believe we don't have much questions now, and I would still request the audience, if you have any questions, you can post it. We will answer your questions offline. Now I will request our very own ma'am, our Associate Vice President of Indian Association of Respiratory Care, Miss Madhura Gauri Sevde, to give the closing remarks. Over
Thank
to
you,
you, ma'am.
Akash. Thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions, but I think we are short of time now, and I think that we are going to have to close. So, as Akash said, we will take your questions offline. So, Abu, there is a question for you from Prasad VK. Just remind me to tell you that question so that you can answer that question. Okay.
Okay.
So, with that, I would like to close the session, wishing you a very happy respiratory care week, everybody. First of all, let me start by thanking Mr. Jitin. He is our General Secretary of the Indian Association of Respiratory Care, and he supported us throughout the week. So we are really thankful to him. I would also like to thank Akash for wonderfully taking over the session, and I just didn't have to do anything about it. I was just here as support for everyone. Thank you to Abu, thank you to Sneha, thank you to Ashish for delivering such wonderful talks. And I am now excited because I know I'm going to give you more talks and more conferences where you're going to be my speakers. So I'm excited for that. Last but not the least, thank you to all the loyal and all the supporting RTs and audience members who are still watching us since the beginning of our webinar. Thank you for giving us that much of bhav and attention. We are hoping to have supported your respiratory profession in certain, even if it's 1%, that will be more than enough for us. We hope that all of us come together and we grow this profession forward. We have more and more RTs come forward, do excellent work that you all are already doing. So thank you all of you for that. So with that, I think I will close this session, Thank you, everybody. See you next time. Bye bye. Happy
Thank you,
Respiratory
ma'am.
Care
Bye.
Week,
Thank you,
everyone.
ma'am.